I think I'm ready. Roll the intro. What's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and these are my 25 favorite metal albums of all time. And hey, if you like to be kept up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. Alright, so there are a lot of ways that I could have taken this, but at the end of the day, I saw other people just agonizing through these lists, and I said, you know what? I want it to be fun, so here's my criteria. When I was perusing my CD shelf, whichever albums kind of had the most visceral reaction, and I felt like I had re-listened to the most over the years, those are the ones that ended up on this list. So obviously this is going to cater more towards albums that I've been listening to for a very long time at this point, going back to my teenage years, and so be it. Maybe later on I'll do another list with a different criteria, but for now, let's just get into it. This is also in no real particular order.
Good luck.
Number 25 is As I Lay Dying with an Ocean Between Us, and this is probably my favorite metalcore band of all time. Despite the unpleasantness, they have such a strong discography. I really enjoy each one. I particularly remember first picking up Frail Words Collapse off of the Hot Topic shelf, but when it comes down to it, this is the album that I feel like I enjoy the most, I re-listen to the most. Every single song on here is basically a single. They're all bangers. There's so many hooks, too. As somebody who just worships great guitar riffs and also great sing-along vocal hooks, this album has that in spades. Number 24, Between the Buried and Me with Alaska, and this is another band that it was definitely difficult. I knew they needed to be included on this list. I almost went with The Silent Circus because that's another one that I go way back with. That's the album I started with. Another one I remember vividly, visually picking that album off of the shelf at the CD store. But I think as far as sort of the cross-sectional album that has the most elements I love, is the most consistent, I've just grown to love over the years. Again, I could pick Parallax 2, which was at the top of my tier list. I could obviously go with Colors as well, but really, I think Alaska has what it's at, and as somebody who was like just starting to get into mathcore in particular, this one really resonated with me, and I will always remember those MTV Headbangers Ball ads. Number 23, The Black Dahlia Murder with Unhallowed. Another band where, and this is probably going to be trend on this list, I could pick an album out of a hat from their discography and be relatively happy with it. I considered going with Ritual as well, and there were plenty of other options, but ultimately, Unhallowed just had that visceral reaction again. When I was scanning the shelf and I saw that one, again, I just had that visual memory of grabbing that for the first time, opening it up, looking through the liner notes, and just experiencing that band for the first time since it was their big debut. At this point, there are so many bands aping this sound, and they put out so many, they basically put out the same album over and over again. They're like the Slayer of melodic death metal. And it is a great album. I think it's kind of underrated too, because it gets overshadowed by sort of the flashier ones that come after this. The songwriting gets tighter later on and everything, but I like the kind of like immature status of this one, and I really enjoy every song. There's a lot of great hooks. Number 22, Architects Lost Forever, Lost Together. This is actually one of the albums that I came to sort of later compared to a lot of the other things on this list, but I cannot stop listening to this album. This is easily Architects' best album. It is them at their peak in terms of their songwriting, in terms of the guitar work, in terms of those hard-hitting vocal moments, in terms of the blah, like that. This is it. This is that album. So much fun. If you want to check out Architects, this will always be the album that I recommend first. Number 21, In Flames with Reroute to Remain. And this is always an unpopular choice. This is where I get a bunch of hate comments. I can already hear you beating on your keyboard down there, but little keyboard warriors, you stay mad. You stay mad, because you know what? This album fucking rules. I remember the first time I heard Cloud Connected, and to this day, maybe my favorite In Flames song still. Like, that one just blew me away. I love the little synth intro and the long build-up, and there's just so much atmosphere. And yeah, there are some uneven moments on the album. Not the entire thing is great, but it has a certain charm to it, I guess, is the way that I would put it. There's just something, I feel there is a nostalgia factor, but that is, again, why this is my top 25 favorite albums, not necessarily like the best albums of all time. Number 20 is Every Time I Die with Hot Damn, and this was another tough one because I love pretty much every Time I Die album. There's so many great ones. There are other albums that I might rank higher than this one just in overall quality, but again, simple criteria, that visceral reaction and the re-listenability factor. I have listened to Hot Damn more times than I can count at this point, and the copy of it that's on my shelf is it's pretty old. It's pretty old at this point. It's got some memories attached to it. And so many hits too, man. Just a bolorama. That, enough said almost with that one. Like, I could jam that that track and that weird little vocal hook in it and all the little change ups, and this was another formative mathcore album for me that made me fall in love with that genre. Number 19, Lamb of God with As the Palaces Burn. Ashes of the Wake is real close, but this one will always be my personal favorite. It's the album that got me into Lamb of God. I will never forget sitting in my friend's basement with him after school. Headbangers Ball is playing, and they premiere the 11th hour music video, and we just sat there in stunned silence throughout the whole thing. It's that real just stark, I think it's black and white, if I'm remembering correctly. Sometimes I go back to these videos and I'm like, oh, this is actually not how I remember it, but that song kills, and every song on this album is amazing. It's another one that has a certain charm to it too, because it's got that, technically speaking, awful production, but as a result of the whole just train wreck that was the production process of making this album, there's a great documentary on it that I've mentioned a few times that you should check out if you haven't already. But it resulted in a very unique sounding album that just goes so hard, and it sounds dark and ugly and bitter and nihilistic and disgusting, and I fucking love it. This album rules. Number 18, Converge with Jane Doe. Another tough pick. Man, so many albums in the Converge discography, and I will maintain that I think that they actually get better with every album. I love the new ones just as much as the old ones, if not more. But of course, this is a classic. This was my introduction. I love You Fail Me as well as a kind of counterpart to this one, but it's just got so many moments. It's got that like teen angst to it too, and it's built into its whole concept and just by energy. Energy. And it was great as an adult later to come back and see them live touring with a Death Clock of all things, and also like getting kicked in the fucking back when I decided to dive into the pit like an idiot. And that was the moment I realized that I was already too old to be doing that shit.
I'm too old for this shit.
Number 17, Meshuggah with Nothing. Another trend on this list is that a lot of these are the albums that like got me into the band, and this is the case as well. I was getting a lot of like guitar magazines growing up as an adolescent, and a lot of like metal magazines. I can't remember the exact names of which publications they were, but the metal one that I had, like every single issue had multiple ads for Nothing, and I will still forever have the tagline of that ad campaign stamped in my brain, which was, "You'll get nothing and like it." Whoever came up with that line, give them all the money. Because here I am like 20 years later, and I still remember that fucking thing. Another thing that's great about this particular album in a very strong discography is that every song has its own kind of unique flavor to it. Like, they kind of, I feel like, experiment a little bit more with pacing and kind of the textures of the songs, so to speak. And you've got like 2 different versions of it you can check out as well, since they re-recorded it with like the deeper tuned guitars later on. Number 16, Periphery with Periphery II. I almost went with Periphery I, because that was the album that got me started all the way back at the beginning with Icarus Lives. Another music video that kind of launched this whole passion for this band. But Periphery II, I think, is sort of a stronger counterpart overall. It's more consistent. The melodicism is just like much more tightly ingrained into it. The production is stronger. And not only are there still like total banger, fucking destroy everything moments like Make Total Destroy, great title, but also like real tearjerker ones like Mile Zero. I sing along to that one and I almost tear up every time because I'm a fucking crybaby. Number 15 is Rammstein with Mutter. This is just a stellar album. For my money, and I said this in the Rammstein tier list, this is easily their best album, if you ask me. I know some people disagree with that, but song for song, like every track is basically a single, and they've always been really good at that. But I think this has some of the most like grand operatic sounding tracks, right from the very opening too, with the Nun liebe Kinder geht fein acht. Like, what an introduction to an album. It got me totally sucked in. And then you have just like your fun banger tracks like Fire Frei, which we used to put on. That was the only Rammstein song in the jukebox at the pool hall that we used to go to in high school, and I would put that thing on every time I was there, much to the annoyance of the other patrons. Number 14, Dimmu Borgir with Death Cult Armageddon. Another one where the music video really got me into this one. Progenies of the Great Apocalypse. What an incredible song. What a just legendary video. I really miss having ICS Vortex doing those clean operatic vocals, just adding this extra level to everything else. Of course, I was already familiar with Dimmu Borgir at this point. I had a friend who was like really into them and had exposed me to several of their albums, but this was the moment where it really took hold for me. And of course, they're utilizing like the real symphonic elements on this album, and it makes such a difference. Those orchestral sections just like blow your hair back. It's like that old commercial where he's sitting in the armchair and his hair is literally like flying backwards, testing out the speakers. I still love this album. Probably one of my favorite symphonic metal albums ever. Number 13, we have Mastodon with Crack the Skye. Lots of different choices here, but I love the sort of extra level of sort of sadness and the conceptual elements that tie into the real life tragedy that surrounded the writing of this album. And then this is just them in the top of their game with their musicianship in terms of the progressive elements and the technicality. Everything comes together. Everything flows seamlessly. This is the most cohesive and grand work I think that they've ever done before or since. And yeah, I love Blood Mountain. Yeah, I love Leviathan. I love those earlier albums. And I love some of their later work too. But for me, like, this is the Mastodon album that you absolutely need to hear. Number 12, Opeth with Blackwater Park. This is almost like the pumpkin spice latte album of the metal scene, I feel like, but for good reason. Like, so many people love it because it is a fantastic album. It's just well written and it's got such a broad sensibility to it. It appeals to people who love really heavy, intense, extreme metal, but also people who maybe aren't like that into metal. Like, I knew people who this was sort of like a gateway album for them, definitely into the heavier like death metal sound. And so there's something to be said about that. The songwriting's fantastic. The riffs are legendary. Like, when you think of the like Opethian sound and the Ackerfeld guitar sound, I immediately jump to thinking of songs on this album with that bouncy like da 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 da, like that. That is Opeth for me forever. Number 11, Behemoth, the Satanist. And a little confession here, this was sort of my gateway into Behemoth. I had been exposed to some of their prior stuff before, but I never really got into them. So it wasn't until this very late in their career album that I really touched down. And another one, kind of like Blackwater Park, similar vein. This has such a broad sensibility to it. Like, it appeals to so many different people for good reason, because it is just so well written, start to finish, so many great songs, but also as a sit-down cohesive experience of listening to it from front to back, you're going to have a great time. There's so much atmosphere to it. Another music video memory here too. The first time I watched Blow Your Trumpets, Gabriel, holy shit, that video. And just that like riff. It's like the perfect example of how like, you don't always have to be super technical. Like, I love mathcore, I love technical death metal, I like it when things get a little bit more impressive and flashy, but it all comes down at the end of the day to, if you can't write that into a solid song, it's worth nothing. And sometimes, song doesn't need all that flashiness, it just needs dun, 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 dun. Like, sometimes that's all you need. Number 10 is Korn with Issues. This one goes way back for me. Like, I remember hearing songs from this playing on the fucking like my Nickelodeon radio. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, maybe I'll put a picture up on screen. That was my radio for a long time because I got it as a little kid and I kept it, and I had that thing tuned to Q101 for alternative radio, and they would play so much Korn alongside with the grunge and alternative stuff. And man, also remember seeing the Falling Away From Me music video for the very first time with the dangly light bulbs and everything. Like, that made an impact on me. And just, I love, maybe this was the start of it, but I have such a fondness for vocalists who have a range and sound different. Like, you can pick them out of a lineup immediately. And I think Jonathan Davis was one of those first vocalists for me where he just had such a very standout sound, and he did all these weird like noises and of course the scatting and everything like that. It was just so different and unique. So say what you will about Korn, but they're great. Like, they are great. they hold a special place in the pantheon of great metal, even if not all their albums are fantastic. But Issues, for me, another one that front to back I just absolutely adore. I have so many memories attached to it. Number 9, kind of in a similar vein, we have Slipknot with their self-titled. I just recently did a whole video gushing about how much I love this album and how it was actually the album that got me into metal. So if you want to hear the details of that story, you should maybe check out that video. But just to keep it short here, again, this was like the starting point for me that made me a true metalhead. And Joey Jordison's drum sound, that Titan snare, and the crazy guitars, the chaos of it all, just it still goes down as one of the heaviest albums on my shelf, despite the fact that I have all sorts of like crazy avant-garde black metal and anal nath rock, and like I have all sorts of crazy stuff that people would argue is heavier, but there's something so visceral and just real about the self-titled Slipknot album, and it still holds up. Number 8 is Tool with Aenima, however you want to pronounce it. I've heard it pronounced every which way. Lateralis is that they're like head-to-head, as I said on my tier list too, but I freaking like, it's funny too, because for a long time I did not like Tool. I resisted Tool. There's something about them that I just did not enjoy, and I actually like The Perfect Circle, and I almost included Mare de Gnomes on this list, but in any case, Aenima I think is a great showcase of both like their more melodic and progressive stuff, but and also their like weirder, more experimental side on some of the like just strange, noisy sounding tracks and some of the stuff that they did. And again, I know I keep bringing up music videos. Drink every time you hear me say music video, but don't, because that's bad. But even learning that like Adam does the music videos, that was mind-blowing to me. I'm like, wow, this dude does the guitar work, and then he turns around and does these like full claymation videos that are absolutely haunting and suck you into them every time you watch them. Yeah, Tool has to be here. Aenima, personal favorite. Number 7, the Dillinger Escape Plan with Miss Machine. I'm pretty sure I picked this album up on its release day. I had recently picked up at that point Calculating Infinity, and I liked it, but nothing could prepare me for this album. When it opens up and it hits you with the like that shit, like nothing prepares you for that. And then it just goes hard from there, and it's got the fast chaotic parts, but then also the weird almost like Nine Inch Nails meets alternative-esque kind of like groovier, kind of funkier, dancier almost tracks on it too. And it's just, it's so good. I love every single one of their albums. Check out the tier list for that one too. Another trend on here, almost every band I'm listing either has a tier list or will have a tier list very soon. Number 6, Skinny Puppy with Too Dark Park. And I look back at this and I'm like, man, it's wild to me that I was able to get into Skinny Puppy when I did, because it was like early high school, and I feel like you almost have to have like at least a master's in weird industrial music before you can get to Too Dark Park. But I jumped straight into it ever since I found out that Nine Inch Nails were influenced by them. And I was like, well, if they're good enough for Trent, they're good enough for me. Likewise, there are other albums that are much more accessible than this one in the Skinny Puppy discography, but stupid me, I jumped right into this one, and I still love every second of it today. Another one where nothing can prepare you for the intro, but just in a different way, because it's got the weird like sound effects and everything, and the contorted like samples from horror movies, and he's seeing monsters, he is losing his mind, and he feels it going. I will never forget that. I will never forget the first time I heard that, and every time I listen to this album and put it on and that part plays, I'm transported back to that exact moment. Speaking of Nine Inch Nails, number 5, we have The Fragile. Yeah, I think a lot of people would go with The Downward Spiral, and that was the album that got me into them, but for me, it's about The Fragile. Like, this is one of the best double albums of all time. Most bands, they drop double albums and I roll my eyes and I'm like, you don't have the capacity to keep me engaged for one full album, much less 2 full albums. Most double albums suck. They're fucking bloated, and you could scale down those tracks and could have easily put out a much more quality single disc. But with The Fragile, not so. Every song is amazing. It is such an experience. I love watching the live DVD of the performance where he played like the whole thing pretty much. Just incredible. We'll leave it at that. Number 4, Deftones, White Pony. This is probably no surprise to regular viewers and people who talk to me on the Discord, because I adore this album. It was another formative album for me, coming off of like the self-titled Slipknot and that new metal era. It just broadened my horizons too, because it changed what I thought about music in general, I think, because there's just so many dynamics. There's like, the super heavy stuff like Elite, but then there's also like weird electronic kind of like peaceful, chill stuff like Teenager. Then of course I love Maynard from Tool, so you got Passenger, which is one of the best collabs of all time. Digital Bath, my personal favorite deep cut Knife Party. I know some people really dislike this album, which is interesting to me, but then again, some people really love gore, and I don't understand that either. So we'll just have to agree to disagree in any case. Easily one of my favorite albums of all time. Number 3, we've got Protest the Hero with Volition. Another album I shout from the rooftops regularly, and it's interesting to me because I don't see a lot of Protest the Hero fans pick this as their favorite. Like, especially when I put up the tier list for this one, I had a lot of people in the comments being like, Volition? What? Not a common choice. Not at all. I will say the new one is kind of like inching up on this one, because that one's fantastic too, but man, I have listened to this more times than I can count. It is my favorite, like, go-to, no matter what mood I'm in, whether I'm driving, whether I'm working out. If I'm in a bad mood, it lifts me up instantly. It's just like the vocals and the melodies of the guitar and the progressiveness and the technicality, and there's just a sense of fun to it, but then also some more serious elements too. And then Mist is probably like the most anthemic song that they've ever done, and that is the one that I will always put on when I need a boost. Alright, I'm losing my voice. Number 2, Dark Tranquillity with Damage Done, another album I've talked about quite a bit. This was really my introduction to the Gothenburg sound and melodic death metal in general, possibly even before In Flames. I forget exactly the order that it went in, but my friend burned me a copy of this album, and I would go to the pool and I'd lay by the pool, and while everybody else is listening to like the latest pop music over the loudspeakers, I got my headphones in and I'm blasting fucking Damage Done. Hook City. This is almost like you listen to it and it's like a sampling of like all the best guitar riffs you could think of for melodic death metal all in one place. There's a reason why they top my list of my favorite melodic death metal bands, and if I were to make a big 4, they'd be the Metallica of it. Or Slayer, I guess, depending on how you look at it. And then number 1, Poison the Well, You Come Before You. I was talking about this a lot recently on the Discord because I was just singing its praises, getting basically everyone in there to listen to it. Most people seem to have a pretty positive reaction to it. Not everybody, and that's fine. You know, it's not for everyone, but what an amazing band. And this album, this came out my senior year of high school, if I'm not mistaken. And so it was very much like the soundtrack to the end of that era before moving on to college. And it's just so beautiful. It's got those D beats and those like punky elements and that energy, but also these like blissful, drifting, ethereal, almost like post-metal-y segments and the post-hardcore influences. Lots of dynamics, lots of ups and downs. It constantly keeps your head turning and it keeps you engaged, and it's just a stunning work of art to this day, and I'm still honored. I know I've said this a few times if you're a regular viewer, but I will say it for the millionth time. I was so honored that I got to interview the drummer Chris Hornbrook on the podcast. Like, that was kind of surreal for me, and he was just such a nice, cool dude. We had a great interaction. Listen to that if you haven't already. But yeah, thanks for the tunes, man. All right, and that is it. My voice is shot. I am sweating, just pouring down my face. Let me know down in the comments, what are your favorite metal albums all time? Try to use the same criteria too, of those albums that just give you that same visceral reaction. But don't go anywhere. I got plenty more videos coming up right after this one. They should be popping up right now. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.